So the overview, I'm going to do a quick overview of what our project is itself. Look at why we use the development of a tool we call the Session Recommender, how we use taxonomical profiles to develop this tool, and how we will use those moving forward. A little bit about the design of the Session Recommender, look at our lessons learned, and then really moving into 2018 and beyond, looking at what some of our future plans are. So a quick overview. The American Society of Clinical Oncology was founded in '64, which promotes for lifelong learning for oncology professionals, cancer research, an improved environment for oncology practice, access to quality cancer care, a global network of oncology expertise, and educated and informed patients with cancer. I have this bullet that went up before on the number of members we have, and in fact I was notified on Friday that we have over 45,000 now. So it's a steadily growing organization. The other thing I want to point out that all of these bullets here really lead to an emphasis on education. And one of our primary delivery methods for education is really our meetings. We host or co-sponsor between 7 and 8 meetings a year, depending upon the year itself. We have some that are biannual as opposed to annual. And so we have a lot of engagement with folks at different levels. So our taxonomy project, we worked to develop a series of SARI, with subject topical genes, drugs, organizational entities, and countries. Really what we talk about here is the use of our subject, drugs, and genes taxonomy in classifying what is really meetings and educational-based content. And I think one of the main things that helped with this project is we were able to very clearly define what our goals were early on. And one of those was going to be personalization. So our first piece of this was, and when I started at ASCO, I realized we had tons of content and did not know what the relationships were to these various pieces. Very disparate, but they had similar characteristics that had yet to be defined. So essentially that was the primary goal of the taxonomy project, was to be able to identify similar characteristics across various pieces of content. Secondarily, was to enhance search. We wanted to produce better results ultimately. And finally, to allow for personalization and automated curation. These are any of our sites, applications, basically anywhere that we have content in the digital format. We are actually being pushed very much right now by our board to look to personalize. So the Session Recommender, which I'll give a little background on, which is that in 2016, I was at the annual meeting. I got pulled into a meeting with our Leadership Development Program, which is a group at ASCO that essentially takes members who are early in their career and trains them to be the next board members of ASCO. So what they do is they get a better understanding of the organization as a whole, and they look at ideas of ways to improve the service delivery to members. They break out into 4 different groups. Each of them is given a specialized task to look at. The case of this group was to improve the overall experience of for annual meeting attendees. And one of the things that they looked at was essentially, why do people not come back in year 1, or excuse me, in year 2 after they've been there in year 1? What they discovered was, based on a series of surveys, was that it was because of the overwhelming size and nature and scope of the meeting. It's too much. The fact is that there are more than 207 sessions given, and those sessions are overarching with multiple presentations within each. There are nearly 2,000 posters presented, and back then we had at least 32,000 professional attendees. That grows each year. This year we're expecting as many as 33 to 33.5. So we get a sense of what that looks like. We hold this at McCormick Place in Chicago, which is basically the size of an aircraft carrier, and it's full of people. So on the left is kind of just the halls in between sessions, and on the right are the poster sessions. So as you can see, I'll define posters in particular as mass chaos. So when we took a look at what was presented to us in terms of a problem statement, we kind of sat down and huddled a little bit, and I think that some of us wanted to go one direction, I wanted to go another, and so on its highest level, we wanted to develop an application that would generate these recommended sessions, and this would be based on the relevancy of the particular session itself, by matching those with the characteristics that we could identify of the individual who was looking to create a schedule. Then what we would do is we basically offer results to them of suggestions, and then they could build those into their schedule. We also have an application that is a schedule builder that allows people to interact with both the abstracts that are being presented, as well as post-meeting, the digital content that's produced on the video and presentation slides, which is called the iPlan. So we started on this project, and we, in some ways, had an idea, but we needed help. So we looked for help in a couple areas, Access Innovations. Dwayne also helped us, and we dug in a little bit and wanted to find out exactly what it was going to take to do this. So initially, we had 30 tracks in the meeting, and we wanted to map those to taxonomical terms. And the reason was because the way we presented our tracks in themselves are very high level, and we wanted to give the ability for attendees to get more granular. So therefore, by identifying these subcomponents of a track, we'd be able to start mapping those to content. In doing that, we also had Access Innovations index all of our annual meeting sessions against the subject drug and genetic disorder. This is complicated in some ways. On the one hand, we have a session, which, as I said earlier, is a series of presentations that are good. On the science side, we have abstracts that are presented, so we do have content that we can use as we try and develop an underlying taxonomical profile for a session. So we would index all of the abstracts and we'd roll them up. We created some rules, played around with a lot of the rules. Bob and I worked probably a good chunk of April trying to manipulate, make sure we were getting what we thought were good categorizations of these sessions without leaving too much out and not getting too granular. So it was, we definitely learned some lessons there. The bigger challenge, however, for us was our education content. And our education content has very little written associated content. So as we looked to index these, we didn't have anything. We had titles, we had tracks, and in some cases we would have specific tidbits of information that we could pull from, but nothing that was really concrete. So we knew going in that the indexing for these education sessions was not going to be as strong as we'd ultimately like it to be. So just to give you an example of, if you think about it at a high level for breast cancer track, which is one of the 30, when we actually dug in and were able to get more granular, this is what we had. I at one point knew the number that's here, but I believe it's close to 25 more granular terms that we're able to apply. So then we started figuring out how we're going to design this. What interface are we going to use that we can lead people down a path to ultimately say, we need some inputs from you, some of which we already have in the data that was provided during your registration, but we don't have everybody's data in a way that we necessarily need it, so we also had to then give the option to essentially input new data as we went through the process. So we created a browser-based application that was designed to really mimic the look and feel of a mobile device. And the reason we did this was because we find that most of the iPlanner usage is actually on mobile devices. So we wanted to engage with people and using the digital device that they are most likely to use or the ones that they feel most comfortable with. Then we worked to design a short questionnaire. This is really where we worked with Dwayne on this. Was designed to quickly supplement the registration information and gather additional detail. So we would essentially run people through a list of short series of questions that ultimately were used to develop a query that we would run against the sessions themselves. And because this was a pilot, I think it was very important, it was very helpful also, is that we built in a feedback mechanism because we knew this was the first iteration. We wanted to evaluate it at the end of it, and we wanted to say, hey, this is what we heard, and this is what we want to do to improve down the road. So the interactive questionnaire was, again, essentially in our registration, we collect a lot of demographic information. Not everybody fills in all that demographic information because it's not required, on the one hand. And the other is we have a lot of people that come in from other outlets. We have almost 30% of our annual meeting attendees come from group registration. And what that typically is they come in from international countries that are brought in because some of the pharma companies will pay for them essentially to come in. And we in the United States aren't allowed to do that. You can't have, as a doctor, receive a gift that large from a pharma company. So when these pharma companies do this, they want to very much control the attendees. And by that I mean that we get basically name, email address, phone number, and the email addresses are only correct about 50% of the time. So we don't have that demographic data for them, so we need to be able to create a way for them to input it if they wanted to be able to actually use this tool. The other piece of this was doing an analysis of essentially what was the intersection of what a person's professional role was, what they said was my primary professional activity, in sync with where it is they work. And I'll explain this a little farther, but essentially it's the fact that an individual who was a physician at an academic or medical center is more likely to attend an education session by a certain degree than they are to attend a science session, which would be abstract-based. So this occurred across the board, and we were able to create weights essentially for the queries that we developed. So this is what it looks like. As you got into the application, we essentially first asked, what is your current role? Now again, if we had this demographic information, this process was skipped, and we just went into the more granular information related to the sessions. Second was, where does your primary professional activity occur? Then as we got deeper, we wanted to get into the topics of interest. So in our registration, we do ask for the topics of interest to be selected. However, they are tied essentially to those 30 tracks, which again are not very granular. So what we did when we started thinking about how to construct this was giving options. So essentially, you go through in the first wave, you select the topics of interest, then ultimately you're asked, would you like to, or excuse me, how important is the content to you, and then whether you want to refine or not. So by refining then, if you selected, for instance, breast cancer, you would then get the list of all of those options that I showed you as we did the mapping of the terms to the track. That way you could get a lot more granular if you know what essentially your focus was as a researcher was ER positive and negative breast cancer. Very specific. It allows for those folks who are specialists to get to their core content without having to kind of guess based on titles and looking through all of the individual sessions and the presentations that are listed in the iPlanner currently. Again then, in building the schedule, we wanted to be able to allow the flexibility of importance. And so essentially we developed a rating scale for that so that we know that when somebody goes and might be a generalist, typically the approach that they're going to take is, in the last year I've had a ton of breast cancer cases, I'm really familiar with breast cancer cases, now I'm starting to get more pediatric stuff. So while I want to brush up on the breast cancer topic, this pediatric is one that's going to be more essential for my takeaway, is I developed what my goals are for attending this meeting. And so we gave them the power to essentially rate the importance of these topics for you, which we then also built into the development of the query. So essentially this is what a taxonomical profile would look like in this way as we used it for this. An attendee was a physician who worked in an academic medical center. They selected a series of high-level topics, developmental therapeutics and translational research, gave that a 5 rating. Hematologic malignancies, gave that a 4 rating. Lung cancer, gave that a 5 rating. And melanoma skin cancers, gave that a 3 rating. So as you can see, there's a kind of interested in one, definitely interested in the other, and then the 4s are kind of in the middle there. They had an associated interest in pediatric oncology. I must have that slide for that, so I have to apologize. We also added the ability to go in and look for specific drugs that are tagged in there. So essentially the idea behind that is that a lot of folks, particularly when it comes to the new research, wants to see what is being studied in a particular drug area. So we gave a list of drugs from the taxonomy they were able to select, which then added a further layer of revision to the query. And then you have the terms that essentially, as they went in and they selected the more granular terms within the track setting, that developed a very targeted query ultimately. And this is what that query looked like. So as you can see, it is pretty complex. We've got the terms themselves, we've got the ratings for the scale, we've got whether it should be more for the topic itself, whether there's a boost in there for the type of session, meaning that we'd elevate education sessions over science sessions if they were in conflict. We did actually also had an extra topic in there that was pediatric oncology, which gives more weight to a matching result that has pediatric oncology as one of its tags. And as you can see in the bottom there, that probably can't see actually because it's pretty small, but I'll read it to you. It's that it has a preferred boost for the session type of education over science. So this is the results as we have it displayed. So we limited the results to 30 sessions, mostly because we did an analysis and there's no way that anybody could possibly go to more than 30 sessions over the course of this meeting. Our default display was relevance, although there was the ability to toggle at the top there to date if you wanted, so you could see it in direct sequential order of how the meeting would run. And then users were able to add or delete using the icons on the right. So in this case, if this was a phone, they'd tap add, which is the calendar, or they'd hit the trash and it'd go away. So they're ultimately building it out based on their own decisions, or they could hit the add all function, which would populate the entirety of the iPlanner based upon this output. So this is kind of what our iPlanner looks like. So while on the one hand, this was a very quick results list if it was still in relevancy, once they start adding this in, they can actually see the exact way that the schedule was built. So it immediately synced after hitting submit. Then they were given additional session details. So if they clicked on the title of the session here, it would expand and show all the presentations listed in there, also give access to the abstracts that were in there. So if they wanted to get that further level of detail, they could via this mechanism. And this was also available in both a desktop and browser, a desktop browser version, as well as we do have a mobile application for the iPlanner as well. Both synced up as soon as this information was submitted to the database. So this is the lessons learned. And so here's a shot of what we did in terms of creating our feedback mechanism, which was we wanted to give the ability to give a rating for the overall. Then we also wanted the ability to have an open text field so we could give detail for perhaps different features, different functionality to potentially explore basically now. So we had 3,300 attendees who completed the session recommender. That's roughly 10% of all meeting attendees, but on the interesting side is that it comprises just shy of 24% of the people we actually had correct emails for that we could contact and market to. So there's an awareness component to this, particularly because it's something new. And what we saw was when we marketed directly via email, that was our highest use. Those emails went out, we saw a surge in people coming to the tool to use, whereas we didn't necessarily see a huge boost from, we had a button that allowed access to it from the iPlanner itself. So definitely an ability to have better email addresses will improve usage over time. And overall, we received an 88% favorable feedback. I want to give a lesson learned actually on this too, that I probably should have. So you can see how we have this set up. We've got the rating scale, which is, I would recommend this to other meeting attendees, not at all likely, somewhat likely, or very likely. We defaulted to somewhat likely, and therefore what we realized were that a lot of people were submitting this because they thought it was a piece of the application itself. So essentially when we look at this, we tossed all those results. We tossed the 3s and only looked at the 5s, 4s and the 5s, and the 2s and the 3s. Because that meant that they basically went in and affirmatively changed the rating themselves and allowed us to at least know we had feedback. So this is somewhat imperfect, so this is really related to, on the 731 side, that's going to be a 4 or 5. And on the 102 side, that's going to be a 1 or a 2. Most of the 1 or 2s also came in on Thursday before the meeting when our database went down and they weren't getting any recommendations at all. So I kind of understand that rating. We also did usability studies. We did direct usability with folks who attended, which were one-on-one sessions that we ran down a list of questions and looked at how they interacted with it over the process. In addition, I was on the floor of the massive hall and was doing essentially one-on-one discussions and survey functionality with individuals who came by the booth to talk to them and get a sense of that. It was good to be able to engage and get feedback. So we kind of combined all of this stuff and still found, our verbal discussions really led to overall positive feedback. But there were some issues that we found. One of the biggest ones, and unsurprisingly the reason we didn't move to do it last year was because of the limitation with time, but was that multiple users had questioned why we didn't actually have the presentation details, that in the results, all we were offering were the sessions. And it was basically we ran out of time to do it. So we knew that was not surprising feedback at all. The other thing was that, this kind of surprised us, I think, more than anything else, was that we limited the number of topics that could be added to 4, and folks wanted 5 or more. I think that there were some folks that just want to see everything that's there and have it broken down. So we realized we needed some more flexibility in there. We found some findings between what people did and how they saw the value. Participants interested in a larger number of topics saw rating of important topics obviously as being more useful. If you've got 5 topics in there, which we limited 4, but you want to be able to know what's the 2 versus what's the 5, and then the results based on that. There was also a suggestion to move from the flat drug list we had to basically a hierarchical drug category to roll it up. That the value of finding a single drug versus a category of drugs that could be applied in targeted therapy was going to be more advantageous. And finally, the expected sort by date versus relevancy for default display for results. That was closer. It was just a tick above for date. So I think that one of the things we found was we probably should have been more clear in terms of the presentation of the options to toggle between those result presentation. So as we look going into the 2018 annual meeting, which is in June, and really just trying to come up with an idea of what it is we're going to do with this, because this kind of, in some ways, opened a floodgate now where we have a new CEO who kind of glommed onto this as a concept, and now wants to personalize everything. Any content that goes out from us from here on out needs to be able to speak to the individuals who are consuming that content. Now, as any of you that work in a digital environment know, that's easier said than done because most people don't want to log in, which makes it very tough to identify. If you use an IP address, you have other limitations. You cross-reference with machine, particularly in the hospital environment. Again, still limitations because multiple people are using the same machine, so it could very well be inaccurate. So for us, really the best way still has to be delivering. If it's an email that's targeted towards individuals, that we would be able to base that on information we have via email, but otherwise we've got to get people to log in. So it's one of the biggest challenges, I think, in scaling this project up to where the desire is to be. But more importantly, we took a look at our data. It's not clean. We're asking different questions in different places, still kind of wanting to get the same data. We're using different values in different places, so we can't combine them in one area. We have points where we ask some questions, and there would definitely be a value to try and gather additional information at those locations. So we took a real hard look at the structure of our data gathering and cleaning up our data itself. So one of the main things is getting data wherever we can and getting accurate data wherever we can. So our two biggest interactions with the folks that we engage with, which are our members and meeting attendees, are going to be the application to join ASCO or to the meeting registration itself. So we worked very much to clean both of those up in a way that we were getting and requiring information that we hadn't required before. Importantly, we've been having registration for 20 years with a company that we don't sync that profile registration back to our database. So we're in the middle of a large project right now that all that data will be collected on our side and we'll be able to use that. But then, as I sat around, I talked a lot with our development team, but we need something else. We need something to power this. How are we going to take all of this information, how are we going to compile it and be able to use it in any application? By basically saying, we've got this profile of a person, but we want to use it to populate the session recommender. We want to use it to populate content on our meeting library, which is a repository of videos and slides from our meetings. We want to be able to use it to populate email that will go out. And we want to be able to do this all simply. So we came up with the idea to really create this personalized profile database that will be a combination of concrete profile data as well as activity data. By activity data, I mean, what did an individual buy? What did they have in their session recommender? What did they have in their iPlanner? Because we can't necessarily always say exactly which sessions they attended. What meetings did they attend? Things like that. So we've developed this database structure, which essentially the left hand is going to be all of those profile characteristics that we can use, with the final one down there on the profile being the most important, which is a taxonomy profile, which is going to be a stored value of taxonomy terms that we will basically define an individual by. We can then apply that into content and look for matchings. So for instance, let's say somebody has 7 terms that define them as an individual from the subject taxonomy, 2 drugs. The more matches we can have to those terms in content, that is how we'll target them with that various content. Then what we'll do is we'll store the data from all of the applications that we're going to be using because they do have differences. So for instance, what an individual does at a meeting isn't necessarily the same thing as what they want to do on a daily basis. So we do recognize that individual activities have traits that don't necessarily apply 100% to the profile database, or excuse me, to the personalization profile, but we will use that to augment that. So constantly updating that taxonomical profile based on all of the lower level data that we can roll up. I have an application 2 there which is undefined, so but we're working on it. So real quickly, I'm just going to go over some of the interface updates we found from the work we did. The back and next labels were not clear, and these are new wireframes that we designed, so these have been implemented screenshots. And we wanted to update the scrollable list to emphasize that additional options were available. People didn't know they needed to scroll farther down to find more things. They thought they were limited to what was on the screen. We're going to display the presentation and presenter details in the results so folks can basically go in there, and you'll see on the left-hand side, that's that. And we're also adding an alert for conflicting sessions. So if somebody selects session A and it's at noon, and then farther down, they get session B, it's at noon as well. We want to give them the ability to understand that there is a conflict and make a choice between which one they want to attend, or add both sessions, which is also another option. And then want to run the same query against posters. So going down the list of sessions, poster sessions are part of it. You move a poster session into your schedule in the iPlanner. Essentially what we're saying at that point is then we'll run the same query against the 200 posters that are in the session. So you don't have to run through trying to find every single one. You've already told us what your interests are. Let us produce that list of posters for you to save you time and create a path for you once you're there. Again, we talked about the increase in the number of topics and the drug classes. And then now, really, as I've kind of been highlighting, is to move into this total member personalization. And an overarching goal is to raise awareness of some programs and projects that we have that people might not know about but be interested in. That's one that has definitely come up at a high level. Also, potentially create specialized content repository based on expressed interests. This would be essentially a skin to potentially ASCO.org, where somebody logs in, they get a portal into a variety of content from all of our 50-some platforms. And then also exploring the automated content emails generated based on the taxonomy profile. Another thing we've heard constantly, we have too many emails, they're not catering to what I want to see. I don't have the time to go through it all, and I need something.